So our first question for this 2019 Mcas exam is, which of the following is equivalent to this expression? Now, let's keep in mind something. Anytime we see the word expression, we are simplifying. Okay? We are not solving. Okay? There's no equal sign here, so there's nothing to solve. Okay, so let's first point that out. Second, you can see we have negative 5x parentheses negative 6x squared plus 1. Okay, now anytime you have a coefficient or a number and a variable next to parentheses, that means multiplication. So we are going to distribute or multiply that negative 5x times negative 6x and then the negative 5 times 1. Now there's two things to keep in mind here. First is that you have a negative 5 times a negative 6x squared, and then you have negative 5x times a positive 1. So we have to remember, when we multiply a negative times a negative, that's going to give us a positive. So when I multiply negative 5 times negative 6, I'm going to get a positive 30. And when I multiply x times x squared, that's going to give me x cubed. Okay? When we're multiplying variables with exponents, you can think of it as either the fact that x squared is the same as x times x, and then when we multiply that times another x, what we have are 3 x's. So that's how we get x cubed. Or you can think of it as this x here, even though it's not written, it has an exponent of 1. And when we multiply variables, the same variable, we add the exponents. So of course, x squared times x to the first is going to give me x cubed, because 2 plus 1 is 3. Then we have negative 5x times a positive 1. And so again, we got a negative times a positive, so that's going to give me a negative 5x. And that's all you need to do for that. That would be your answer right here. Now, when we look at quarter 2, this has us asking for what are the values of, and it has f parentheses 0, f parentheses 5, f parentheses 18. This is what we call function notation. Okay. And how we read this is, we read this as f of 0, f of 5, and f of 18. Now, anytime we have this function notation, what it's asking us to do, so you notice how it's written f of x equals, and then it's x times 18 minus x, okay? And it's looking for f of 0. So what we've done is we've replaced the 0 with x. So that's exactly what we're going to do. Anytime I see an x, I'm going to put a 0. And then we're just going to simplify. So this is obviously 0 times 18, and then anything times 0 is going to give me 0. So f of 0 is 0. So again, we're still just simplifying. So if I do f of 5, again, this time I'm going just to substitute in where I see an x, I'm going to put a 5. Okay. Now this is where we need to remember about order of operations. Okay. Anything in the parentheses comes first. So we would do 18 minus 5, which is 13. And then we would have to multiply 5 times 13. Now, unfortunately, because this is question number 2, you do not get a calculator for this. So you'll have to multiply it out by hand. And when you do that, 13 times 5 is 65. So f of 5 equals 65. Okay? So again, all we're doing is substituting whatever number is in the parentheses, and we're replacing it, that number, or any time we see an x. So if I do f of 18, that's going to be 18 times 18 minus 18. So 18 minus 18 is 0. And again, anything times 0 is 0. So both f of 18 and f of 0 give me the same answer of 0. So that's how you would solve those two particular problems. For this problem, we need to take into account that we have both a circle and a right triangle. So our question says that based on the diagram, what is the circumference in units of the circle? Well, first we need to remember that on our Mcas reference sheet, there is a formula for circumference, which is 2 pi r. So to calculate the circumference, I need to know what the radius is. Now, based on my diagram, I have the radius is not given. But what I do have is a right triangle. So remember, this little box tells me that I have a right triangle. And I have 2 sides of that right triangle, 6 and 8. So the next thing you should think of is, okay, do I know any information on or any formulas to help me solve for the missing side of a right triangle? And the answer is yes. And that formula is Pythagoras' theorem. A squared plus b squared equals c squared, where c is our hypotenuse, or the side opposite our right angle. So I can solve this by putting in the 2 side lengths. Remember, we have to square first, so I get 36 plus 64. 8 times, remember, when we're squaring a number, it's the number times itself. So 6 times 6 is 36, 8 times 8 is 64. And so c squared equals the sum of 36 and 64, which gives me 100. And the final step to find out what c equals is to take the square root of 100. Now, when we take the square root of 100, we are looking for a number times itself that will give me 100. And that number is 10. 10 times 10 gives me 100. So that gives me the diameter. So the hypotenuse of the right triangle is the diameter of the circle. But I need the radius of the circle to solve for my circumference. And that's when we need to remember that the radius is half the diameter. Okay, so my radius is half of 10, so my radius is 5. Now that I have the radius, I can plug that into my formula of 2 pi r. So I get 2 times pi times 5. And because this is the first session, and you don't have a calculator, you will not be required to multiply by pi. So you would just multiply your two numbers, 2 and 5, to get 10 pi for your circumference. If this was on section 2, you would do 10 times pi button on your calculator, or 10 times 3.14. But in this case, that's not required, and your answers are what we call left in terms of pi. So your answer would be 10 pi.